we do have microphones on either side of the room, so if you could just make sure I catch you and we'll get through as many questions as we can. We'll start right over here in the middle on the second row.
Good morning, Commissioner. Bob Holliday, WRL.com.
Morning, Bob.
Starting in the beginning of the new millennium, the ACC had some rather lackluster bowl seasons, especially in the Orange Bowl. And yet, as you mentioned, since the CFP was announced, has been in the national championship conversation every year, winning the last BCS, but of course the CFP had already been announced then, and has been stronger and stronger since. How do you explain that?
Well, I think that I don't think it's explainable in one or two aspects of it, Bob. I think it's multiple, and I think it really started in the early 2000s when we began talking about expansion and the need for expansion, and should we not? If so, why? And we felt like looking ahead. Sometimes you have to try and be visionary, you know, as a business, as a conference, as an individual, and most of us felt very strongly that with the way things were progressing, where college athletics was going, how the football side of things was beginning to dominate, if you will, the business aspects of it and the revenue generation aspects of it because of its growing popularity. We felt like we had to do two things as a league. One was to grow and enhance our footprint and our marketplaces and our television sets. And the other was that we had to get more competitive, top to bottom, in football. So those were the two items that we beat to death, quite honestly, meeting after meeting after meeting, and we got there. But the success on the field doesn't happen, and certainly I think we enhanced ourselves football-wise by the schools that we have brought into the league since the decision first was made in 2003, but then 4 and 5 is when the Miami and Virginia Tech came in, and then Boston College right on top of it, which gave us the opportunity to have a conference championship game, which we had to have 12 schools in order to do that. Then later, the opportunity to bring Pitt and Syracuse into the league, who have not had as much recent success in football, but have tremendous tradition and history in that sport, which can help tremendously in rebuilding it and putting it back together, and having that same success going forward possibly. It also affected our ability to do some things television-wise and marketing-wise that we would never have been able to do as a 9-member conference, for instance. Then Notre Dame, and the arrangement with Notre Dame, which I think has been a tremendous plus for the league as well as for Notre Dame. Then the loss of one school and the immediate decision to bring in Louisville, to bring us to where we are today from a membership and market standpoint. Plus, all of those schools have excellent football potential. And that's part when you couple it with the 9 schools that we already had, it just has given us so much more depth. And instead of 1 or 2 really good teams, we have a lot more than that right now. And I think that will continue. But the biggest thing is the institutions responding to the challenge to improve football, to bring our football nationally up to a level similar to basketball. And I think we're in the best shape we've ever been as a league at this point in time, in a real balance there with football and basketball. because basketball is so important to the history of our league and what we became, how we were perceived. And our football, while we had some, over time, great players and great teams along the way that won some national championships and some Heisman trophies and those kinds of things, we weren't doing it with nearly the frequency or with multiple teams the way we had been able to do things in basketball. And as I said, the business model was changing. About the early 2000s was when the football revenue from television equaled basketball television revenue in this conference. And now, a number of conferences before then, that had already taken place. But the biggest thing is that the schools responding, investing in the sport, investing in facilities, investing in hiring quality coaches, and investing in recruiting.
Football postseason, of course, is ratings-driven, rankings-driven. Do you feel like the ACC gets a fairer shake under the CFP ranking system as opposed to under the BCS? Is that part of the equation?
I think so. You know, I've said this before. I think the CFP has been the greatest startup I've ever seen in college sports, I think. Doesn't mean it's perfect, but one of the reasons I can say that is we've been in it the first 4 years, so I get that. But at the same time, I do think it's been to our benefit. And I think some of that is the eyeball test. I think we finally have put together a period of time where our league has improved consistently in football. It's not a flash in the pan kind of situation. And there'll be a year, I'm sure, where our champion or another team is not in the playoff. I mean, it's already happened to, you know, some really good conferences. And that's part of the deal at this point in time, but we'd like to put that off as long as we possibly can. But I think the CFP has been really good for the ACC and really good for college football.
Next question over far left side of the room.
John, Luke Teacock, Raleigh News and Observer.
How are you, Luke?
Hi, John. Some of your cohorts have said they expect the NCAA to adopt some, if not all, or most, if not all, of the Rice Commission's recommendations for basketball. What's your sense on that, and do you agree with everything in that report as it's being implemented?
I do think the vast majority of it, if not all of it, will be adopted. And I think it needs to be adopted. That doesn't mean that I agree with every piece of it, but I think what we need to do right now with college basketball is to show a commitment to adopting those concepts. And there'll be more than concepts when they're adopted in August. But I think we'll need to understand that in taking those concepts in a very short period of time and turning them into legislative protocol, doing it that quickly, I think we can expect, Luke, that a year from now or 2 years from now it may need tweaking some. But I think the bones of it are outstanding, and I think we're at a point in college basketball where we need to take those steps. I don't think it'll be perfect in August, so I think we're going to need a mechanism to adjust to some degree going forward, but I think it's important to take that first step, and I think it needs to be a giant first step.
We'll move back over here to our right front row.
Hey, John. David Glenn from The David Glenn Show and ACCSports.com.
David.
By sheer coincidence, the same year you were born, the NCAA started keeping track of college football attendance, so 70 years ago. And for the first time, it's declined 4 years in a row. The SEC lost an average of 2,500 fans per game last year. their worst decline in 25 years. My question to you is, even in an era where I imagine TV money makes up for a lot of problems, how are you addressing as a league, how are your schools addressing a significant red flag when it comes to declining attendance in major college football?
Mainly talking, David, about best practices among ourselves. That's one of the great things about a conference is schools can spend time together and share ideas and what works and what doesn't work, because we're in a period now where people's ability to watch a game is phenomenal. Whether it's your phone or your living room, and it's a quality experience. Some, particularly in your living room, some more than others, but you can still do other things, keep up with the game, see the highlights, and all of that is good. So maybe sometimes to gain something, you give up a little something. But I think the biggest approach is, and every school is a little different. School A may have a parking problem, school B not at all. But I think what our schools are finding is sharing that kind of information about the in-stadium experience, and also modernizing stadiums and bringing them up to snuff, so to speak, so that the in-game experience is as good as it can be. And that can start on the field with the product, and it can also start on the field with keeping the game going. We're continually working at reducing the length of games, and I harp on this all the time with our officials particularly, and so I'm pleased to tell you that the ACC, in terms of conference games, we had the shortest length of conference games of any of our peer conferences the last year, and I think the year before as well, if I'm not mistaken. And that's a good thing, and we keep looking at rules changes that also may shorten the game, because Major League Baseball is dealing with this right now, with attendance down and people complaining about the length of games and rules changes they're trying to make without taking away the soul of the game itself. But I think it's a trend we have to keep an eye on. You want to be developing young fans. You want to be developing students into fans while they're there, because generally they're the ones who go on and as they have some successes in life, give back to our booster clubs and our universities. So it's an all-encompassing issue that is about the field. It's about fans' total experience, from parking to concessions to bathrooms to comfort in their seats to reception they can get on their mobiles while they're in the stadium. All of those things come into play, and I'm sure I've missed a few. But it is a concern that we talk about often in our league meetings.
Go here in the middle, in the back, David.
Hello, David.
Supreme Court decision on sports gambling, where do you think the ACC overall and college football really should go in terms of injury reports?
Well, I just had a lengthy conversation with our Coastal Division coaches this morning about that issue. You may remember we have had not a rule, but a gentleman's agreement among our coaches to share publicly injury information. We were the only conference that was doing that, and ironically, we decided not to do it this year. So we won't be doing it this year. But my guess is that, I think the ultimate question with us is how do you protect the players and the integrity of the game? And what's different now that some things are legal from when it was illegal? and what does that change? But the ultimate question is, how do we protect our players? Because obviously a lot more people and people you know, if it's going to be legal, and we're in 10 states. We have schools in 10 states. So it's going to be challenging because some states will pass it and others won't, I feel sure. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But my guess is we will have a national, I won't even call it an injury report because I think it would need to include other situations that would be in sync, be consistent across the country. I think that's critically important, and would include not only injuries, but you know, if there's disciplinary action where a player is suspended for a game or for whatever reason, that would need to be a part of it as well. And I think that reduces, to some degree, people you don't really want coming around players and managers and doctors and anybody associated with the program, coaches, trying to get information in another kind of way, an underhanded kind of way. So my general feeling, and I sense that our coaches' general feeling is the same, that that's probably something that needs to happen on a national basis. I don't think it'll happen for this season. I suspect it'll be, you know, for next season, but I'll be surprised if that's not in place.
We're going to take our next question from second row here in the middle.
Hi, Mark Berman in the Roanoke Times.
How are you doing?
I wanted to ask you, curious to get your opinion. Recently we had the former Louisville basketball players sue the NCAA to try to get their vacated NCAA championship reinstated, kind of get their reputations back. We just kind of wanted to see, you know, do you feel like they deserve to, you know, to win that suit? Would you like to see them win that suit, or do you kind of feel the NCAA made the correct call there?
You know, it's hard for me to weigh in on that. That's kind of a no-win for me to weigh in on that. I'm not that familiar with it. I thought it was an interesting lawsuit. I've never seen that before. So it was, you know, it's certainly creative. And I do understand players that had nothing to do with the problem being negatively impacted by association. I get that. I don't know if the lawsuit is the solution to that, but I you know, just in terms of NCAA sanctions, the whole idea of so negatively impacting an entire university or an entire team with penalties, and oftentimes it's after the fact with players that didn't even have anything to do with it, and coaches that didn't have anything to do with it. You know, I've said for years, surely we can find a better way. And there is more concentration on the individuals involved when it can be proven. And that's where I think it should be. I've never been a real fan of vacating championships, quite honestly, in general, because you know, it's a little hard to act like, okay, that game never happened, because it did happen, and somebody won, somebody lost. You know, if somebody won dishonorably, I'm all for, you know, pursuing that, but I'm not sure that taking down a banner really helps anything a whole lot. I'm sure there are those who would disagree with me on that, but there's certain aspects of the suit that sort of touch on some things that I've felt, you know, in the past in terms of finding the individuals who caused the problem and dealing with those individuals, as opposed to an entire university and ultimately players and coaches who had nothing to do with the problem to begin with.
Got 2 more questions. We're going to start on the far left side, front row. Susan?
Hello there.
How are you, Susan?
Good, thank you. I had a question about the gambling situation also. I just wanted to know what, you talked about the players, but just what impact you think that could have, on college football, and specifically, what are you concerned about most? And
I'm concerned about, what I'm concerned about most, I think, and I don't know how much it's going to change. I mean, I may be one of the most naive people in the world about gambling. Quite honestly. I can't even tell you the lingo that goes with it, quite frankly. But I know it can be incredibly problematic for the integrity of our games, and I don't like the optics of gambling in college sports. But at the same time, I mean, it's obviously going on illegally and has been for years. And there are people who are constantly trying to get information about programs and individual players and et cetera, so they can bet in the most effective way they think they can. I don't know what legalizing it, I don't know how much it changes everything, and I'm not sure anybody does. We've talked about this at our commissioners' meetings a couple of weeks ago, and it's kind of a, well, what if, and is this going to change or not? I think we're going to have to see how it plays out some. I mean, there's even an argument about, you see people talking about, let's get a 1% integrity fee, so to speak, to try and manage this and do what we need to do on our campuses with our athletes. And then you have others say, wait a minute, we're going to ask to make money out of this, an enterprise in which people are betting on our players, and we're going to take money because people are betting on our players. And so, some people have a moral problem with that. So it's not going to be simple. I'm not sure, sometimes when you think something's just going to be horrible and an incredible mess, it comes into play, and, a year or two later you find out, well, that's not as impactful as I thought it would be. And we've seen that in recent years in college athletics with some things. The full cost of attendance, there was all kinds of ruckus about because it wasn't exactly the same at every institution, and it was going to impact recruiting tremendously. Well, I ask coaches now, and it's like, no, that really hadn't happened. Well, some people thought the world was coming to an end when we went to full cost of attendance. So, and this is different, but there are just a lot of questions there to answer and to work through. I don't think there are a lot of here or anywhere else. In talking with Mark Emmert and his staff and my peer commissioners, there aren't a lot of answers there right now. I think we pretty much know what the questions are, but we don't have the answers yet. And as I think I said earlier, we've got 10 states to deal with just in the ACC. One thing that would seem to make some sense to me is if Congress put some parameters on to bring some consistency state to state if a state decided to legalize gambling. I'm not saying you take that right away from the states. I'm just saying that if the state of North Carolina decided or the state of Florida decided to legalize gambling, it would have, certain parameters that it had to work within that were mandated by the federal government. Seems to me that might be helpful in at least, laying out some consistency state to state. That's coming from a very naive point of view.
Take our last question here in the middle on the left side. Joe?
To follow up on the gambling questions, Joe Ovius from The Fan. You mentioned the optics of college and gambling was not something you really liked, but you could say the same thing about college and alcohol for a while there. Now the ACC sells beer at tournament sites. So when you start looking down the line for future tournament sites, there could be arenas that you're talking to that have in-game, in-arena gambling. And that's a revenue generator. So how do you balance that with what the schools need to keep the arms race going, to make more money, find new ways to fulfill cost of attendance and everything else? This is the next thing. How do you address that with future tournament sites?
Well, again, very fair points. And spot on, I think. We'll just have to work our way through it, just like we have, the alcohol issue. It took us years to, and having some of our schools allow alcohol sales for us as a conference to do it at our championships. And we moved into it gradually. And quite frankly, we have fewer incidents related to alcohol at our championships now, when we control the sale of the alcohol, than we did when we didn't. And supposedly there wasn't any alcohol. So gambling could work out, the same way. I'm not saying it won't. I think we just have to plow into this, understand it as best we can, and see if it really is as, if you're really opposed to it, see if it's as bad as we really think it is. Because I don't think we know. But it still gets back to, even if it's okay, we're still going to want to do whatever we need to do in order to protect the integrity of the game itself. And I don't know if it's legal. Does it make it a little easier for a player to, or a coach or a trainer or a manager to, share information they shouldn't share, or, it's got a lot of tentacles to it. But the answer might be ultimately, this hadn't made a bit of difference. But I still don't really like the optics of gambling on college students. And you have states with lotteries. A number of our states have, education lotteries. But it's from people, buying a ticket. It's not from gambling on how Joe's going to play today.
That concludes today's ACC Commissioners Forum. As a reminder,